Hi, this is Darcy Telenko, Extension Field Crop Pathologist at Purdue University. And earlier this week, June 11th, 2024, we found some tar spot here in Indiana that was active. This finding is actually pretty early for us here in Indiana, but since finding it and then finding it in a couple of other counties, I've been getting a lot of questions on what growers should do and when they should think about putting out their fungicides. And so I thought I would share a little bit of some of the data that we collected through our research here at Purdue on timings and some things I think growers should think about as they look towards trying to manage the disease. So here I'm showing the disease curve that develops in the crop canopy in Indiana, and I'm using 2020 data, but again, this is generally what we've seen every year. And we had trials out looking at the timing, so looking at applications at various growth stages. For this trial, we found tar spot on the 27th, 28th of July, and you can see that with the red line there. And then from that point, you can see that the disease remained relatively low, pretty much through almost all of August, so almost a month. And then about that R2, R3 stage, we start seeing the disease pressure increase. So we start seeing more and more of the tar spot stromata in that crop canopy. All of this data here, we're looking at that ear leaf. Like we want to protect the ear leaf for that yield potential. So those are the leaves we're targeting when we try to look at how well our fungicides are working. So again, ear leaf and above, this is looking at the disease development on that ear leaf. So again, we find the disease early in the canopy on the 27th of July, and then it almost takes a month before we really start seeing it move up into the ear leaf, and then that exponential increase in disease that we tend to see towards the end of the season. But I just want to show what happens, when we put our fungicides out and what those do to this disease curve. So the idea is we want to suppress the disease, push the curve off, to get the optimum yields from that crop. So if we look at where we applied V8 and V10 applications that year, so they went out at the 14th of July and the 20th of July, you can see they were ahead of where we even found the disease. And then if you look at the disease development in those crop canopies, it really doesn't change from that red bar, the untreated control. So what this is telling me is those fungicide applications went out too early. And by the time the disease was really getting active in that canopy, their activity was now gone. And so those ones missed that window of protecting those leaves that we're targeting. If we look at that year and we look at the VTR2 applications, so again, VT went out on the 7th of August, so that is almost a week, 10 days after that first find. And then R2 on the 21st of August, so 2 weeks later, you can see what those curves have done is they've shifted. They're shifting the disease off. We're holding the disease at bay. At R5, we start seeing some more disease move in the canopy, but the goal is that we've protected that yield potential in the crop. If we look at that canopy at that time, there was no disease on the ear leaf at VT, but when we went and sprayed at R2, we recorded about 0.01, which would be one little tiny stromata on that leaf up to 0.3% severity. So what I'm showing here on the picture is what 1% looks like. So at that point, if you can find 1% on that ear leaf, you probably can see tar spot on every plant. But again, I just want to say you do have some time in there to find the disease and make an informed decision. But you just have to be ahead of the game, because as the disease progresses along, if we go into late, that's what I'm going to show you is where we miss that opportunity. And so if we look at R3, so those sprays went out the 2nd of September in this trial. They were okay. There was about 2% of disease on the ear leaf, so a little more disease, but you can see that blue line, we're starting to lose a little bit of control. So more disease had gotten in before we had applied the fungicide, so it couldn't quite slow down everything. But again, we do see a slight reduction in the total disease that develops throughout the rest of the season. Now, if we look at going at R4, which was applied about here, we had about 6% disease on that ear leaf. So here at this point, really that gray line doesn't really shift the curve. Maybe there's a little reduction in keeping some of whatever's green left green at the end of the season. But you can see, R4, I would say, has failed. So we went too late. But at 6% ear leaf, you could have caught that earlier. And so my message is you have time to get out, look, scout for the disease, make an informed decision that, yes, the tar spot is active in the canopy, but also understand that you have to be there before we reach this stage. If you get in the field at this point, then probably a fungicide is not going to give you the control that you want to see. And then we went again at R5. And so R5, we were at 16% disease that year, too late. We're not going to recommend an application at dent anyways. This is kind of the data that fed into that and where we're talking about trying to find our optimum timing for tar spot. And so I just thought I'd share some of that of what we're thinking about. Some of my main points again, you just need to scout. You need to know, is the disease active in that canopy? I know some of these first lesions are hard to find, but give it time. Go back again next week and look around, see if your neighbors are finding it, and then I think you need to understand what stage is the corn. So a lot of the corn that I found tar spot in this week is still V5, V6, and I would say I'm going to hold on to my fungicides until I get those leaves that we really want to protect growing and covered. So I really still wouldn't even start before V10. And again, when we've pulled all our data from multiple years where the disease starts at different times, tassel to silk to milk, the VTR1 to milk has been our optimum timing window for just tar spot. And I think if you really, to think about a return on investment, we really want to, use one well-timed single application in our corn to protect against these diseases. If there are other diseases of concern, you need to think about that. If you're worried about getting ear rots, or if you fusarium ear rot in there, or mycotoxins, and that timing, needs to be around green silk, and in order for the fungicides to be active against that pathogen. If you're worried about southern rust, we want to kind of wait until those diseases move in to try to make sure we're protecting the crop when the diseases are active. We have seen, some of our trials, particularly in 2001 when the disease started earlier, just like the season, where 2 applications could provide a good return on investment. But that's only happened in a couple of our research trials where we had gone out at V8, V10. But if we go that early, we may need a 3-week later treatment. And so that's just something to think about. If we just held on a little bit, maybe only 1 application would get us there. And so thinking about, 2 applications may make that return on investment marginal, especially with our current prices that we're looking at. So again, I just want to remind you, anything going out before V10 won't be protecting many of those leaves that we're targeting the ear leaf and above for making that yield. But be aware that if the disease is active, so we need to make sure we stay ahead of the game and protect before it really gets into that crop canopy. For more information about field crop diseases in Indiana, you can check out our website at indianafieldcroppathology.com or follow me on X at @Telenko.